So there you are.
Good afternoon. Well, a lot of people ask me, what is aviation law? What exactly do I do? And I came up with my short answer is that if the machine has wings, I can do the transaction. And if it has one wing, I can do the lawsuit. And over the past 40 years, most of my practice has been involved in handling airplane crash cases. I defend pilots, mechanics, parts manufacturers after a crash. And I've actually went back and I looked at a lot of the accidents, see what actually caused them, and I discovered that a lot of the same mistakes that pilots make that cause fatal airplane accidents, people outside of aviation make those same mistakes, and they cause heartburn and even disaster in their own personal lives. And what I've discovered then is that if we can learn from those accidents, we can prevent future accidents, but if we apply them to our own lives, we can prevent some disasters in our own lives as well. So what I'm going to do is show you about 5 of the accident mistakes that I've seen and how we can prevent them, and then provide some take-homes so perhaps you can apply them to your own lives. Now the first accident, lesson number 1 is if you keep making the same small mistake, eventually it will bite you. This particular accident happened to a very decorated Navy fighter pilot, very experienced pilot. He had his twin-engine airplane that he used to go back and forth to pick up his daughters for a visitation. Now this airplane has a very simple fuel system. You have fuel tanks on the left wing, fuel tank on the right wing. The left fuel tank feeds the left engine, right fuel tank feeds the right engine. Very simple. There's also a cross feed on there. You have the capability to feed the right engine from the left tank. It's almost never used. In all of my flying, I've used it exactly twice, and that was to demonstrate to the examiner that I knew how to do it. So there's no reason in normal flight to have it on cross feed. Well, this pilot took off from Fresno. He got full tanks before he departed Fresno, going back to Fallon, Nevada, a little over an hour flight time away. When he landed, he didn't land, he got back to Fallon. He lost both engines in the traffic pattern, stalled and crashed and killed everybody. And we found out after the crash that the crossfeed was on the right fuel tank.
You pressed the wrong button on that remote. There you go.
It was on the crossfeed, which meant that he was operating, left engine was getting fuel from the left tank, right engine was getting fuel from the left tank as well. So he drained all his fuel out of the left tank, ran both engines dry at the same time. Well, this checklist, on the pre-start checklist, says fuel in the main tanks, cross feed off, so we ignored that one. Pre-takeoff checklist says fuel in the main tanks, cross feed off, so that was ignored. He's in flight. He would have had a very heavy right wing because he's using all the fuel in the left tank. He apparently ignored that. And the pre-landing checklist says fuel on the main tanks, cross feed off. So it was a simple mistake. If he had caught it any one of those times, he would have prevented that accident. It's a shame, but that's what happens. And I've seen it again and again where people make a small mistake that costs them dearly. I had a colleague with his own business. He lost over $1 million because his bookkeeper was embezzling from him over a period of many months. But had he been looking at the bank accounts once a month, he would have caught it. He would have saved himself a disaster. And think about it in our own lives. How many times have we made a little mistake that we can correct, and we don't correct it, and it turns into a big mistake?
The bottom one, go answer that.
First lesson is know your equipment. Lesson number 2 I've learned is if you don't have to do anything right away, don't do anything until you think it through. You may remember this accident happened at Chicago O'Hare. It was an American Airlines DC-10. Took off. The left engine separated from the wing and went over top of the wing. It cut the hydraulic lines on the left wing. And the leading edge slats on the left wing retracted, while the leading edge slats on the right wing were still out. Even after that happened, he was still climbing. but he was above what we call the best rate of climb speed. And the normal procedure when you lose an engine is you slow down to the best rate of climb speed. Totally wrong thing to do here, because when he did, that left wing stalled. He went off to the left and school's out. You can see that the left engine is missing. You can see the fuel coming out of the hole where the engine had been. Now what he should have done is kept his speed. Say, look, I know something's wrong. It's not quite what I'm used to, because whereas you normally need a little bit of right rudder to handle that left engine and a little bit of right aileron, he needed almost full right aileron. He should have sent his co-pilot or his flange engineer back to see what the problem was. Had he done that, he would have recognized that the slats were pulled in. Then he could have known, I'm going to have to land at a very high speed, and he'd find the longest runway he can find, even if it's in Iowa. He would have landed safely. There was a similar thing happened back in 1965. We studied in engineering school. There was a Pan Am 707 took off from San Francisco headed for Hawaii. And the outboard engine on the right side, the number 4 engine, separated, opened the fuel tank, and actually started a fire which burned off 25 feet of wing on the right wing. Once again, the pilot did not know what was going on, but he knew not to change anything. In fact, he kept his calm. He told the passengers, folks, we're having a minor problem. We're going to have to go back and land. And we know exactly what happened, because there was a passenger on the right side with an 8mm camera who was taking films. He actually saw the wing being burned off. But the pilot kept his speed. He landed safely. And Boeing said later, if he had slowed down as he had been trained to do, he would have crashed. Now, in my own life, I've sort of taken that to heart. When I was a young lawyer, I got a really nasty letter from opposing counsel, and I was really angry, and I sat down and I dictated an equally nasty letter and had it printed. And then I thought better of it, and I threw it in the drawer overnight. I said, I'm going to think about this before I send it off. After thinking about it, I decided it really wasn't worth starting a war, and I didn't send it. And the other opposing counsel and I got along very well after that, because I didn't do that. Another time when I was a young lawyer, I wasn't quite so circumspect. I was in a deposition with a Philadelphia lawyer who was being really obnoxious, and I was just biting my tongue, trying to say nothing. And then I objected to one of his questions, and he said, I don't understand your objection. And I said, I'm not surprised. And I had to apologize to him at the break, but I told him I just couldn't resist when he left himself wide open like that. But what I tell my clients is, whenever you're tempted to push the send button, read it again and ask yourself, would you be willing to see this on the front page of the LA Times or blown up poster size to go to a jury? And I tell my clients too that documents can make or break you. So be careful what you put out into the ether, because it's not coming back. And the story I tell is a lawyer that thought he could talk his way out of anything. He came home from work one night, and his wife whacked him over the head with a frying pan. He said, what was that for? She said, well, I was going through your pants pocket. I found a slip of paper with Mary Lou's name on it. He said, oh, that's not what you think. I was at the horse races. That's the name of the horse I bet on. So he came home the next night, she whacked him again. He said, what was that for? And she said, your horse called. So lesson number 3 is, sometimes you have to break the rules. Rules are there to be followed, but not slavishly. Now, Switzerland is an interesting country. They say that everything is either required or forbidden. It's a very rule-bound country. And it caused a fatal crash on this Swiss Air case, which I'll tell you about. You may remember it. Back in 1997, it was an MD-11 that took off from New York headed for Geneva. They were in cruise over Canadian airspace. They had a fire in the cabin. And the captain quite properly said he was going to divert and land. And they steered him toward Halifax. Had he just put the nose down, gotten down, he would have been okay. But instead, he said, we've got to stay up here and burn off some fuel. You see, the airplane has a maximum landing weight, which is lower than your maximum takeoff weight, because they realize you're going to be using a lot of fuel before you get there. No, the only problem landing overweight, you're going to have a longer landing roll, and if you have a hard landing, you might damage some structure. But if you make a normal landing, have enough runway, it's not a problem. So the worst thing he could do was to sit up there burning fuel, because as he was burning fuel, the fire was getting more and more intense. Eventually he lost control of the airplane, everybody died in the crash. What he should have done is said, I don't care what the rule is, I'm going to get it down. And in fact, there's a regulation that says, if you have an emergency, you can deviate from any regulation to the extent necessary to deal with that emergency. I thought about that. I had a Rotary project I did for a charter school down in Watts. In fact, you remember I brought up the people from the school and a bunch of the students. Very interesting principle. That school is in a war zone, but the school floors were so clean you could eat off them. The kids were in uniforms, they were extremely well mannered. They were sending kids to college when a lot of these kids came from schools where nobody had yet graduated from high school. But he had a very strict rule that the kids are not allowed to come into school wearing gang colors. And he enforced that rather rigidly. But one day, one of the really good students came into school wearing gang colors and his sneakers. And he sent him home. The kid came back wearing the same sneakers, wearing gang colors. First reaction was to do something rather drastic and lean on this kid. But he talked to the kid, he found out this was the only pair of sneakers the kid had. So he quite properly made an exception to that rule. And that kid graduated and went to college. So when we think about the rules, think about whether it makes sense. You know, I've been told that the person that knows how always works for the person that knows why. Lesson number 4. Sometimes you have to say no. You may have seen this diagram. You may remember what it's for. It's the Kobe Bryant crash that happened about 2 weeks ago. Now what happened here, this pilot was a very experienced pilot, and he had an instrument rating, but the operating limitations for the company prohibited flight under instrument flight rules. He was limited to VFR. And he had made that trip from John Wayne Airport to Camarillo many, many times. Just go up to Los Angeles, follow Route 101 all the way into Camarillo. Chances are he had never done it in marginal weather. In this case, the weather was such that he was not going to get past Camarillo and Thousand Oaks. The weather was socked in with very low ceilings and very heavy fog. But on this particular day, he went up to Los Angeles, and you may have heard the story that he had to circle for 15 minutes before he could get clearance through the Burbank and Van Nuys airspace, which is not a big deal. If the weather's less than 3 miles visibility, the control tower owns the airspace, and you have to get special permission to go through there. It's called special VFR. And they cleared other traffic through before they could clear him out. And instead of clearing him to go along Highway 101, they cleared him to go up I-5 because they had traffic taking off to the south of Van Nuys. So he could easily have landed at Burbank or Van Nuys. But he got past Van Nuys and he asked permission to turn southwest, intercept Highway 101. He intercepted Highway 101 just about at Calabasas. We'll never know exactly what was going on for sure, but we know that he had been flying at 1,400 feet, which is about 600 feet above Burbank and Van Nuys, which would be about 400 feet above Calabasas. But he told me he was climbing to 2,300 feet to get above the clouds. Now, what he was planning to do after that's anybody's guess. But what happened there is when you get into the clouds and you're not paying attention to your instruments, you can become disoriented. You can get into a very steep turn, very steep descending turn. You don't even know it unless you're paying attention to your instruments. So he turned, helicopter turned to the left, He had no business turning left. He should have been turning to the right to go back where he came from. We know that he came out of the clouds in a very steep dive, hit the ground, burst into flames. The good news is that chances are nobody knew of it. But this is a perfect example of a pilot's job is to say no. A pilot command is responsible for making sure he can get there, and if something comes up, it's his responsibility to deal with it. In this case, the only rational thing to do was to make a 180-degree U-turn, get back to clear weather, go land at Burbank or Van Nuys. Tell the passengers, I'm sorry, we're not going in this helicopter to Camel Road today. But how many times have we been in a situation where our boss asked us to do something that isn't right or even illegal? And we could go to jail for doing these things, and the boss may not, they'll throw you under the bus. I had a client who was working for a title insurance company. She got a home loan in for closing. All the documents were signed by the borrower, but the dates were missing on the 3-day right of cancellation. And she told the loan officer, and the loan officer said, well, just go ahead and fill in the dates and close the loan anyway. And she said, no, that would be illegal. And they sent her an email saying, just go ahead and appease the client. They actually put that in writing. She refused to do that, and they laid her off. And we filed a lawsuit for wrongful termination. We collected on that. Because an employer can fire you for just about any reason or no reason, not for refusing to do something illegal. That's the good news. How many times has it happened that people don't fight back? But whenever you're asked to do something, and it's your job to say no, you may want to be sure you say no. As a charter pilot, I've been into that situation where people want to get where they're going. And the car companies will tell you, so if I needed this freight tomorrow, I'd put it on a truck. What I've learned is that if you tell them in advance, I may not be able to get through, you've covered yourself. Twice I had to divert, but I told them beforehand I probably wouldn't make it. And it was okay. Another time I told them it's going to be iffy. And I got in, and they gave me a tip for getting in.
Can I ask a question?
The expectations.
Yes.
About this particular scenario that I have lesson 4, that helicopter was an older vintage Bell. Wasn't equipped with terrain avoidance.
It was a S-76, and I get so annoyed with these congressmen that think they're experts. Terrain avoidance wouldn't have done him a bit of good.
Okay.
He was at 2,300 feet when he lost it. The highest terrain in that area was 1,600 feet. So all he had to do was make a U-turn, fly for about 2 minutes, get down, he'd be under the clouds, nobody'd be the wiser.
Fair enough.
But that's a good question. Lesson number 5 is that accidents happen quickly and unexpectedly, so be prepared. At one point I had more time flying airplanes than I did driving cars. And I know more people that have been killed in car accidents than airplane accidents. One of them was my brother, who was 28 years old, driving to work in a heavy fog, got run over by a truck. So it can happen. So it's important that we recognize that we're all human. We don't know when we're going to go. That means make sure you have an estate plan, make sure you have a living will, make sure your family's taken care of. But also, I found it's important to make sure that where you leave something behind. One thing I've learned in my old age is the things I'm most proud of are the things I've done for other people that can't repay me. And for anybody that dies, you can find a dozen people who will say nice things about you. The real question is, what will people say about us 5 years after we're gone? That's the legacy that we leave behind. So bottom line is, 3 things you can take home. Number 1 is take care of the little things before they become big things. I had a friend who thought his marriage was in good shape until his wife left in the middle of the night, took the bank account with him. Turned out he hadn't been paying much attention to her. And it taught me a lesson that I say good morning, I say goodbye to my wife every day. Pays big dividends. Maybe that's why I'm still married. Number 2 is think things through before you take rash action. It's easy to stop and think about it. Most of the time we don't have to do it right this minute. When we think it through, we may not send a letter, or we may soften it. Or we may pick up the phone and not leave a paper trail. And number 3, keep your affairs in order, be proactive, and have something that you'll be proud of when you leave. Thanks very much.